Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
If you went on a road trip and you didn't stop for a Big Mac or drop a crispy fry between the car seats or use your McDonald's bag as a placemat, then that wasn't a road trip. It was just a really long drive. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's.
It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables. Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft, pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Hey all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or Shekup.
And we are here for our really last episode of this season.
Yeah, last episode for a while. Definitely last of season 9. And we are talking not really about the lore. We're talking about Jason Schreier's article that came out recently about Dragon Age the Veilguard. And his article was titled Inside the Dragon Age Debacle That Gutted EA's BioWare Studio. So, not a very positive headline, that's for sure, but we're going to break it down step by step for you.
And the fandom, and if I'm not mistaken, calls this the Veilguard Autopsy report.
Yes, and I think that may even be mentioned in the text of the article, but I haven't memorized it, so can't say for certain. But basically, what I'm going to do is go through some quotes from the article, read them. We can discuss them. After the mid-break, we can talk about some takeaways and thoughts and just kind of general final things to ponder, perhaps. So, as an overview, basically this article goes into EA's expectations for Dragon Age the Veilguard's performance, the development cycle, and There's a lot of conversation that happens about kind of the relationship between the Mass Effect developers and the Dragon Age developers. So we're going to get into all of those things in this episode. So just to jump right in, the first thing that I want to talk about is the Veilguard's performance. So the article says, quote, "Not long after Christmas, the bad news surfaced. EA announced in January that the new Dragon Age had only reached 1.5 million players, missing the company's expectations by 50%. The holiday performance of another recently released title, EA Sports FC 2025, was also subpar, compounding the problem," end quote. Now, I have thoughts, but I want to give you the opportunity to share your opinions first. What do you think? Because I know that you played both of the games that are mentioned.
No.
You didn't play EA Sports 25.
You're thinking of
college football. Okay.
Well, I believe this is a FIFA game.
Okay.
That didn't make it.
Regardless.
I think that, I don't want to say that video game industry overall is declining, because I don't necessarily think that's true, but because the popularity and the acceptance, the being accepted as adult gaming, and that's more of an acceptable hobby nowadays. So I don't want to say that that's declining, but I do think that there is something to be said of a general sentiment among the gaming community of just not supporting crap companies like EA. And I love BioWare, and I love Dragon Age, I love Mass Effect. But EA has a history of putting out bad performing games that have extreme bugs, of extreme price gouging, and extreme microtransactions that make games pay to win. Mm-hmm. And so, I have played if we look historically with EA, it's not just about Dragon Age and FIFA and Anthem. Look at the launch of Battlefront 2. Battlefront 2 in the 2017 version is rated now as one of the best Star Wars games of the new era. Its launch was not so, because its launch was riddled with microtransactions, it was riddled with bugs, it was riddled with all of these things, and it was taking forever to get multiplayer matches, and it was not great. Mm-hmm. And people came back of it, and then there were other things. Look at Star Wars Squadrons. Again, another game that had a lot of hype behind it, but fell short. I don't really think this is a BioWare problem. I think this is an EA problem.
I hear you, but also the Veilguard had a pretty flawless launch. It wasn't buggy. It wasn't riddled with microtransactions. But I do hear what you're arguing, because I think that EA's reputation for those things is a little bit hard to overcome.
I also think in general, EA and BioWare had been able to get past some of their more what might be considered woke things in their games, because that woke agenda, or the kind of YouTube grifters anti-movement against those games was not as strong of a movement. It definitely was still there, and if you don't believe me, look up Gamergate and you will understand. But that it was still there, but it wasn't as strong, and I think that
we live in a different world now.
We do. We live in a different world where these things are much more hot button issues, and much in issues that are more in the forefront of our cultural conversations. I do think that I used to think, man, that seems like an unrealistic expectation. But when I think about it, comparable games did do better. The DAI did better. Even Dragon Age 2 and Origins did better than that. They might not have grossed as much money or done something like that, but they performed better in copies sold and doing all of that.
I don't know if you have do you have the stats for that?
I do not have anything to do that, but I do.
You're just saying that based on your opinions then?
Yes, that is my opinion.
I don't know if we can compare it, because to me it feels like apples and oranges. To compare a game from 2009 to compare to a game from 2024. It feels very difficult to compare. But for me, I want to go back to your earlier point about the gaming industry decline, because I don't think the gaming industry has declined. However, I will say I think the gaming industry has regulated is maybe a better way to praise it, because, the gaming industry exploded in 2020 and 2021 when we were all at home, locked down because of COVID. And our lives have resumed, 5 years later, and people are busier. People have less time to focus on games now. And that's just the reality of not being locked in our houses every day, right? And so I think that explosion in 2020 led to, okay, there may have been a lot of companies that hired more developers, hired more staff to kind of keep up with that demand. And now we're back to a place where, okay, the demand has maybe calmed down for games, and we've got, like, the industry has to kind of figure that out. And so that's kind of my take on it. But I do want to talk about Dragon Age Inquisition for a second, since you brought it up, because I was interested in this quote because of the sales forecast that EA wanted to reach 3 million players in the first month, let's just say first quarter that the Veilguard had released. And when I first heard that, I was like, that seems like a lot. So let me look up the other sales forecasts. So I couldn't really find all the information for Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Origins, probably because they're so old, but I specifically did find it for Dragon Age Inquisition and Trespasser. And so I couldn't find the exact, what they wanted to reach, but I found, per Mark Dara, that Dragon Age Inquisition massively outperformed expectations and still is, to this day, BioWare's best performing game. As of September 2024, Dragon Age Inquisition had sold 12 million copies. Now, obviously, we know that the Veilguard wouldn't have the same kind of boost and longevity that Inquisition had, since Inquisition won Game of the Year. But 1.5 million copies of the Veilguard over 2 months compared to 12 million over 10 years? That doesn't seem like a flop to me. That seems pretty comparable. Like, if you divide 12 by 10, you get 1.2 million in the first year.
Right.
And I'm sure that's not, you can't divide those numbers evenly by the years. Like, they probably had for Inquisition way more on the front end than they're getting now. But to me, I don't know, it just doesn't seem as like it's as much of a flop that the EA is trying to make it out to be.
So, I know these aren't comparable, but I looked up some stats from Assassin's Creed. The most recent Assassin's Creed game, of the 3 most recent Assassin's Creed games, which is Valhalla, Mirage, and Shadows, 2 of them are number 1 and number 2 for highest selling Assassin's Creed games of all time. Now, we talked about this in Assassin's Creed Valhalla released in fall of 2020.
Right, so peak COVID.
They call it the perfect storm for video game release. Everyone downloaded this game. Like, this was an entry point for a lot of people into Assassin's Creed because it was Viking related, and it did theirs. Valhalla to this day has sold 20 million copies.
In 5 years.
Yes, in 5 years.
That's crazy.
Yes. And I know I have my own criticisms of that game. If you want to hear those, you can listen to the Assassin's Creed Lorecast. AC Shadows has sold 2 million copies as of the last data point that we got.
Which was when?
I think because it released in March. It's been 3 months, 4 months. So probably within the first 2 months in initial sales. I mean, it surpassed Valhalla in there, but 5 years, 20 million copies, that's a lot.
How has it surpassed for Valhalla?
It hasn't surpassed for Valhalla, but it has surpassed every other Assassin's Creed game.
Okay.
And so I don't think the sales numbers are generally all they're considering when they're considering this a flop. I think EA is looking at, did this game generate new players? And I don't think it did.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
I mean, I don't think there was ever really, I don't think this game was ever really going to be an entry point for new players, because it's not a sequel to Inquisition, but there's so much of it that has to be. And I saw somebody, I don't remember who it was, it may have been on Reddit somewhere, but there were people talking about how really this game should have been split up into 2 games. That we should have dealt with Solus and all of that, and then dealt with the Evanurus. And that the Solus game could have been more of a sequel to Inquisition, and then the Evanurus game be more of the Veilguard game.
Well, and I will say the Veilguard itself is a departure, and we're going to talk about how it's a departure from mainstream Dragon Age, because Dragon Age has always been that, in the different acts, you deal with different types of villains. Now, I would say that even though Dragon Age Inquisition is a 3-act game, I would say without Trespasser, it's a 2-act game. Because your first act is dealing with the Mage Templar and trying to seal the breach. And then your second act villain is Corypheus. And then your third act villain is Solus. And the Vidisala in Trespasser.
Yeah.
And this follows this kind of trend. I mean, Dragon Age Origins, Loghain is kind of always there, and the Archdemon is kind of always there. But you have to deal with these kind of act villains as you progress.
You don't just deal with them all at once.
No. And Dragon Age 2 kind of perfected this formula. You have the Deep Roads Exposition, Act 1, the Qunari Occupation and Conflict, Act 2, Mage Templar, Conflict, Act 3. And there are pieces of each of those acts in each other. You get pieces of the Mage Templar and Qunari in Act 1, and then more Mage Templar in Act 2. And so there's that, and I think the Veilguard departs from that, and I think that's why it feels like it needs to be 2 separate games, because it should have been I think we would have benefited, yes, from a more Inquisition based of okay, we're going to stop Solus, we've gathered these allies that we know of to stop Solus, let's go, and then we stop Solus, and we kind of have an Act 1 finale being Varric's death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely hear that. But I do want to get back to just the sales and the marketing for a little bit. And so this next quote says, according to interviews with nearly 24 people who worked on Dragon Age the Veilguard, there were several reasons behind its failure, including marketing misfires, poor word of mouth, and a 10-year gap since the previous title. Above all, sources point to the rebooting of the product from a single-player game to a multiplayer one, and then back again. A switcheroo that muddled development and inflated the title's budget, they say, ultimately setting the stage for EA's potentially unrealistic sales expectations. A spokesperson for EA declined to comment. I completely agree with this second half of this quote. I don't necessarily agree that poor marketing, poor word of mouth, and a 10-year age gap were really the reasons behind its failure. I think the really only marketing misfire that I see from the team was more so about them saying this is the most companion-focused game, which frankly is just not true. Mm-hmm. And you can overcome a 10-year age gap in games. I mean, when was the last Baldur's Gate game?
A long time.
Exactly. Decades. So I don't agree with that. But the second half, that the switch from a single player to multiplayer and back to single player is the reason for its failure, because we're basically talking about 3 different games at this point, and we've put the budget for 3 different games into the sales numbers of 1 game. And that's why it failed, because EA had unrealistic expectations for how much the game would pull in to cover all 3 of those.
Right. And when you're talking about we've said this many times, live service multiplayer games are always going to pour in more money than single player games because of the longevity and ability to continue playing them.
Unless it becomes a runaway smash hit like Baldur's Gate 3.
Yes.
Or Dragon Age Inquisition.
Correct. Or Skyrim, for lack of a better word. I don't even know. I didn't even look that up of how much money Skyrim has pulled in for Bethesda.
Well, they've re-released it 18 million times, so probably a lot.
Right. And so Bethesda, and that's another point. Bethesda takes a long time to release their games in between their titles. But with the exception of Starfield, most of their games have been smash hits. Fallout 4 and 76 took some flack when they were released.
Yeah, but people still talk about Fallout 4's character creator.
Yes. So like the longevity thing feels like a lazy excuse to me in a lot of ways. I think that's a little unfair. Not a lazy excuse on the developers, but that would be a lazy excuse, I think, on EA, because we've seen time and time again of companies having long periods between their development and still releasing smash hits, still releasing things that are true to where they are.
Yeah, but the issue is that those companies, they know how to handle a long wait in between games, and they don't meddle in the development process. That's what EA does. EA meddled in this development process, forcing them to switch back and forth between different types of games. And like I want to really get into the multiplayer stuff, because in the article it really implies heavily, if not outright confirms, that Mark Darrah's original departure from BioWare in like 2020 was a direct effect of EA forcing BioWare to switch into the multiplayer model. And so to me, that's significant. But this next quote, it says, quote, Matthew Goldman pushed for a pulpy, more lighthearted tone than previous entries, which suited an online game, but was a drastic departure from the dark, dynamic stories that fans loved in this fantasy series, end quote. And so it really seems to me like this tension between what the developers wanted for the single player game versus what EA wanted for the multiplayer game is the heart of the tension.
Yes. And I think tension is the right word. Is like this whole development cycle has been what I would consider the writers and lead developers of Dragon Age fighting with EA to maintain the heart and soul of this game.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think they lost that battle, but there was a lot of ground given.
I think that the release of the Veilguard was not the end of the war for that. Because I think EA, in just everything they've said about, in retrospect, after the Veilguard's release, I feel like they have basically just said, okay, yeah, single player games don't work. Every game needs to be multiplayer, and we're not going to have, heavy writing, heavy exposition games. Like we're not going to do that because they don't work. And they're using Veilguard as the evidence of that, which I don't feel like is fair. But at the same time, they're extrapolating the data.
Right. And I think this is an important thing that when you're dealing with what I call hard sciences, so like biology, math, well, math's not math and science, like there are strict rules and exceptions disprove rules. In like something like economics and something like sociology and psychology, these more kind of like soft sciences, the exceptions do not disprove the rule. And like that is the point of like, you need to look at, yes, Elden Ring has multiplayer concepts in it, but it is mainly a single player game. From Software releases mainly single player games. Bethesda releases mainly single player games. Larian releases, like, it is multiplayer. Baldur's Gate is multiplayer, but it is, again, like the formula of a story-driven single-player game. These companies have had huge successes with this. Skyrim will be 15 years old next year, and people are still playing it to this day.
The same thing is true with Dragon Age Inquisition.
Right, exactly. Like, these are these points, and like, I think BioWare got a little bit of their kind of formula where they could, like, multiplayer as an option, like with Mass Effect 3, Andromeda, and Inquisition. Like, people really liked that. They liked the having. I know people talk about Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, and like this was a great multiplayer. And so I think there's a place for that in BioWare games, but it can't be the focus. And the thing about the Veilguard is there's so much about it that feels like a live service game, and like, I think EA is a point of like, you're just not listening to your fans. Like the people of, and like I feel like EA is forgetting a cardinal rule of business, which is that it is 10 times more expensive or extremely more expensive to get a new customer than it is to keep an existing customer.
True, but also, why would they listen to the fans when they have the stockholders right there?
I guess that's fair. And like, you're talking about one of the biggest gaming companies in the world.
I know.
And like, this is not just like I talk about Ubisoft being a big gaming company, but EA is just another. If Ubisoft is AAA, EA is pushing quadruple A.
Yeah, well, I want to dig into this more because I have another quote about the single player versus multiplayer from the article. And so, we know that they did revert back to the single player. We don't really know the details of why. I can make the assumption that their beta testing or their developers, somebody pushed back enough that EA listened. But this quote says, in theory, the reversion back to Dragon Age's tried and true single-player format should have been welcome news inside BioWare. But there was a catch. Typically, this kind of pivot would be coupled with a reset and a period of pre-production, allowing the designers to formulate a new vision for the game. Instead, the team was asked to change the game's fundamental structure and recast the entire story on the fly, according to people familiar with the new marching orders. They were given a year and a half to finish and told to aim for as wide a market as possible. Now, what I want to say about this is really I'm just quoting myself here because in our Veilguard recap episode, which came out at the end of last year, I think, maybe early this year, I said it feels like this game struggled and suffered under unreasonable development crunch and at the same time a 10-year development cycle. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, and like, I'm going to compare this to building a house. What EA did is basically someone goes into a house. They have built all of the framework. They have started putting up walls. Like, they are ready to, like, they've installed windows and, like, cut door frames. They're ready to put, like, the finishing touches on a game. And the homeowner comes and says, I don't like any of this. We need to change it. But you can't tear the house down and start over again.
Right. But here are my new architectural plans that you have to align to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
and
exactly
like,
it.
I know building a house is the development cycle on building a house can vary. You can do it really quickly or you can do it over a long time depending on what you're looking at. But this is like you've spent, I mean, they started development on this game not long after Trespasser released.
Yeah.
And we were announced in 2020 that it was not going to be a live service game.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 5 years of development that it went through. And then, boom. When they, and like EA or BioWare is good at like short development times because, I think Dragon Age 2 was released in 2010 or 2011.
Yeah, there was a very short development cycle for 2. But also, Dragon Age 2 was criticized just as badly as the Veilguard was when it first came out.
But it was only 3 or 4 years between 2 and Inquisition.
Yeah.
And I think, and we were about 4 years of a development cycle from us being announced that it's going to not be a live service game to the release.
I don't know the exact of that.
But it from 2020 to 2024.
Okay.
So at minimum, a 4-year development cycle on this single-player game. But they weren't. I feel like if BioWare was allowed to tear it down and build it from the ground up, it would have maybe been
it probably would have been better. But, I mean, I think that, earlier you said Assassin's Creed Valhalla was a perfect storm of good circumstances. I think the Veilguard is a perfect storm of bad consequences because you also have the actors strike, the voice actors strike, who couldn't do promo and probably prevented them from re-recording a bunch of lines and, all this stuff politically in our culture that's going on. And, just everything kind of came together and had like the perfect time to criticize this game and everything about it. That's frustrating to me. Because I do have things I like about the game, and I also have things I criticize about the game for sure. But this game is not, in my opinion, this game is not a flop in the way that people say it was. And it's also not a bad game. Like, yes, there are things I would have wanted them to do differently, but at the end of the day, it's still Dragon Age, and it's still the Dragon Age that I love if it didn't go as deep as I wanted it to.
This is what comes down to, is that because Dragon Age fans, I will use the term feral, are feral.
Passionate.
It wasn't just the super fans that were consuming any media that BioWare released about Dragon Age. Because there were fans who were like, oh yeah, like I really want to, because Inquisition's story was so good. Because Inquisition's story left on such a cliffhanger, they wanted to know. People wanted to know. And so they consumed that media. And the media of like the books and the comics and the short stories really sets up this profound tension building in Thedas of like an all-out war in Thedas of some kind, an all-out catastrophe across the entire continent. And in the Veilguard, we get that, but like none of those like tensions, all of those tensions are resolved off screen. The infighting in Orlais, whatever the heck is going on with Ferelden, the civil war in the Cune, the like issues in Minrathous, like the issues with the Chantry, all of that gets resolved off screen.
And that goes to a deeper point that's in this article, in that because it's resolved off screen, we don't get to decide how it happens. And the article says, quote, "The game's biggest problem, early players agreed, was a lack of satisfying choices and consequences."
I agree. And I think that it comes down to a point of, you know, they kind of did this formula of like Mass Effect where if you do everything, you're going to get a better ending.
Mm-hmm.
The problem before Mass Effect with the trilogy was it was a 3-trilogy game, and you could screw things up, or you could make a decision in Mass Effect 1 that had unintended consequences in Mass Effect 3, and like you would have no idea.
Right. And that's the thing about it, is that in Veilguard, it's very much like, oh, well, if you just do all the companion quests, you'll be fine. Whereas in Mass Effect 3, it depends on the choices you make with the companion quests. And it depends on who dies at the end of Mass Effect 2. And, you know, there's so many things and impacts that work together as you go along. In Veilguard, it's everything in the Veilguard only.
Right.
None of the previous choices from the first 3 games are really included in that.
Well, and like I'll use an example of like the Tachanka, the Krogan choice. You have a choice in Mass Effect 2 whether to save or destroy Malin's data.
Mm-hmm.
And like that is a classic BioWare choice that we talked about this in one of our patron chats about like strong arguments can be made for both sides. So you could think you're making a Paragon choice in destroying the data, but then Eve dies, and that hurts.
The end.
That hurts Krogan and like Citadel Council relations hugely because Eve is not there to guide the Krogan people.
Yeah.
And so there are just a lot of things like that, and the Veilguard doesn't have that because the choices you make in the faction quests, other than like getting their favor up, doesn't really affect things. And like you can still get a quote unquote good ending, but there's something about like the fact of like, I had to make this choice and this has far reaching consequences. Yes, I saved the galaxy, but at what cost?
Right.
You know, like these are these points, and I think the Veilguard solely lacks that. And I think it's a point of like, what do you do? And like, there's not a choice that's like, should Cole be a spirit or a mortal, a human? Like, what is the right choice here? What is the choice of like different morality decisions that aren't in there? And you don't actually get that much choice in the companion decisions.
No.
It doesn't really affect them that much other than like what armor they get, or like I think that Balara is on whether or not you keep the what's it called? The thing that's like has all the knowledge about the elven people.
I
in
don't
there.
remember.
Yeah, but you can keep that, and I think that will affect the elven people, but like that doesn't have an effect on the story.
Mm-hmm.
Or whereas like the choice between Haramont and Balin affects the dwarven people drastically.
Yeah. No, you're right. I do just want to put a pin in this conversation though, because I want to pivot to the last quote that I have, which is really about the divisions within BioWare. And so this says, quote, in 2023, to help finish Dragon Age, BioWare brought in a second internal team which was working on the next Mass Effect game. For decades, there had been tension between the two well-established camps, known for their starkly divergent ways of doing things. As the Mass Effect directors took control, they scoffed that the Dragon Age squad had been doing a shoddy job and began excluding their leaders from pivotal meetings, according to people familiar with the internal friction. Over time, the Mass Effect team went on to overhaul parts of the game and design a number of additional scenes, including a rich, emotional finale that players loved. But even changes that appeared to improve the game stoked the simmering rancor inside BioWare, infuriating Dragon Age leaders who had been told they didn't have the budget for such big, ambitious swings. It always seemed that when the Mass Effect team made its demands in meetings with EA regarding the resources it needed, it got its way, said David Gator, a former lead writer on the Dragon Age franchise who left before development of the new game started. But Dragon Age has always had to fight against headwinds, end quote.
This is so frustrating to me.
It is. It's very frustrating.
Because like it's frustrating to me that from a like development company side there's this tension, because I don't feel like that tension exists between the fandoms. Like
I agree.
There's so much overlap between Mass Effect and Dragon Age, and like I feel like of like loving their IPs, like the fans in general love them equally. You might have like there are more people who play Mass Effect. It's a larger audience. But, like, the people who play both love both.
Yeah, and I've always said, like, there are no casual Dragon Age fans. Casual Dragon Age fans are Mass Effect fans who also play Dragon Age. Dragon Age super fans also play Mass Effect. Not all Mass Effect players play Dragon Age. But, like, almost everybody who's played Dragon Age has played Mass Effect. Mm-hmm. And so it is frustrating that there's this tension there, but I do, again, want to go back because at the end of the day, the blame lies on EA for stoking this tension, because the quote itself literally says Mass Effect developers get whatever they want and Dragon Age developers have to be okay with the leftovers. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, well, of course there's tension between the two because you're treating them differently. And even if Mass Effect does make more money for the company than Dragon Age does, Dragon Age still has your best-selling game.
Yep. And the game with the most awards.
Right.
Like, it won first game of the year. Now, I will state that I probably do think that if they had not won, probably both in the Game Awards had existed then, both Mass Effect 2 and 3 probably would have been contenders for Game of the Year, at least, if not winning. So I don't want to like oh, your only Game of the Year winner is in Dragon Age, because
it's not an accurate comparison.
Because it didn't exist for the Mass Effect trilogy. And like from another point of Mass Effect Andromeda, let's talk about disappointment. Like, for real. And I know you haven't even really played past the prologue of that game because the text is too small.
I've played a little bit past the prologue. But yeah, I hated it and gave up and have never gone back to it.
Right. And it's like, I always say this about Mass Effect Andromeda, is it's a perfectly fine game and it does okay. It's not the game I wanted.
Yeah.
It's not the game that I wanted out of Mass Effect. But like, we look at these things and I just like, it's like making your kids fight for your love and attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, you're only hurting everyone.
Right.
You're hurting yourself and you're hurting them.
Yeah. Great comparison. So, okay, let's go to our mid-break. I know we're a little bit late on the mid-break, but let's do that and then come back and we'll talk about some takeaways.
All right.
What does every USAA member have in common? Family. We're one big family who supports the military community and their eligible families. And if you, your parent, or spouse served, you could join our family and save big on auto insurance. Visit USAA.com/join today to check your eligibility. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Using a Clorox disinfecting wipe to clean that stuck-on sauce from the stove feels like...
Oh, boy. That tickles. Stop.
It feels like coming home to your needy corgi after a long day.
Best part of the day, finally.
With Clorox, clean feels carefree. Clean feels good. Use as directed.
I went to Kirkwall once. Yeah? Bit of a shithole. Yeah.
Well, tell me, have you ever licked a lamppost in winter?
What do you think rooks like in person? Do you think they smell nice?
What is wrong with you? And have you forgotten which side you're on?
No. I mean, think about if we could turn them. Riding beside a rook at the head of Devinter's vast armies.
I could stab them for you, on the house.
All right, welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons. Thank you so much. Special thank yous to Lisa M. and Genesis, our first patrons. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/DALorecast. Another great way to support us is leave us ratings and reviews on Apple or Spotify. If you leave us 5 words and... I did it again. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. And so I have several comments to read today because you'll realize we are going on a quick break that we'll talk about after I do the reviews. But I'm just trying to get all of our unpublished ones out of the way so that no one's waiting for months to get their comment read. So this first comment comes from Kayla Zorg on the Veilguard Companions debrief, and so that is our most recent patron episode. And so they say 5 words. In all seriousness, I absolutely adore this podcast. It's only one that I have pop-up notifications turned on for. It's fun and informative. Thank you. Well, I feel very honored that we get to be a notification. Shelby particularly hates notifications, so that's a huge honor to her. Our next one is from our in-depth Veilguard review. This comes from Rodney and says, this episode was an absolute banger. Thank you, Rodney, for that. A comment from a long time, an episode from a little bit ago, our last fight episode on that book. This comes from Nix S. Still catching up on the podcast. Thank you, Shelby, for shouting out the audiobook. I work on the production side of audiobooks, and some of these narrators are just brilliant in their performance. Great stuff as always. Awesome. Thank you so much. And then our last comment also comes from Rodney again on our Aveline character deep dive. Rodney says, She-Cup, I feel like we didn't even disagree that much. Me listening while in the fetal position. Why can't we just get along? We did have some disagreement on the Aveline episode, but it's all in good fun. So lastly, reminder, this is our last episode before Baby Cup is here. At the airing of this episode, Baby Cup is scheduled to be delivered
like 2 days after the episode releases. Yeah.
Yes. Very, very
3
soon.
days.
Yes, it's the Monday after the Thursday.
Yeah.
And so that's exciting. We will be taking some time off for like a month and a half, 2 months. And so don't freak out if you're not seeing episodes. We haven't stopped the pod. We just have a baby and are taking some time off with that. if you want to stay connected and know when we come back, the best place to do that is join our Discord. Come to the Cups Podcasting No More Discord. That is the place to hang out with us. And that's all I have for the mid-break. So I think we can get in to talk about some takeaways.
All right, let's do it.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Don't Templars have anything better to do than come up with new ways to torment mages?
No. Again, I'm so sorry Manfred keeps wandering in while you're asleep, Lucanus.
I think he wonders about spite.
Curiosity has feet.
We have enough feet already.
It has feet.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is
Okay, so the end of the article, and I'm just going to go through, I have a few things. I'm just going to go through them one by one. You can add your thoughts in at the end of each one I have. So the first one is like, you know, the end of the article really talks about how EA needs, like desperately, financially needs, more than just sports games and live service games. And studios that do more than just sports games and live service games. And in order to accomplish that, BioWare is really their only one. And so like they have to either fix BioWare, quote unquote, or start a new studio. But here's the thing though, in trying to force single player focused studios to be live service creators, they're going to do both things badly. So this really isn't an issue, in my opinion, of fixing BioWare, quote unquote. It's an issue of EA stop meddling in studios that know how to make a single player game. I just don't understand how they don't see that.
Right. And I'm going to make a comparison here because in my own professional kind of thing, this is like trying to get me to go to a Mormon church and teach Mormons about their church history. Like, could I do it? Yeah. I have the knowledge, I have the skills, I have the credentials to do so. Would I do it well? Probably not.
Because you're not Mormon.
And I don't understand the context. There are contexts that I don't understand. There's nuance that I don't understand versus me explaining general church history or explaining United Methodist history. I'm going to do a lot better of that because I understand the context and I understand the stages to do that. BioWare has been a single player game since like the 90s, the 80s.
Almost forever.
Right. And so to get them to do that is just... I don't know.
It's nonsensical.
Right.
Like, it literally does not make any sense. My next takeaway is really about the beef between Mass Effect and Dragon Age. I didn't realize there was such beef between the two teams. Sure, like we said earlier, we've always known that Mass Effect is more popular and palatable to a larger audience. But, like, the fantasy audience in particular has exploded over the past 10 years. And in its own right is huge. So to me, it's a bit surprising to hear that Dragon Age has quote unquote always been treated as the redheaded stepchild of BioWare, especially when BioWare's first games like Jade Empire and Baldur's Gate were those more fantasy games. I feel like most games outside of Star Wars games early days are more fantasy focused. So combining that with, you know, the explosion of the fantasy publishing world in books is just surprising to me that they wouldn't want to milk that instead EA is encouraging this tension when, okay, we could be expanding and marketing into other audiences of other, you know, books, comics, fantasy TV, other genres of entertainment that are fantasy, and getting those possible consumers to play Dragon Age.
Yeah, I don't know really what they're thinking of, like treating Dragon Age as BioWare's redheaded stepchild. It just is a point of like Dragon Age started out to capitalize on the Game of Thrones audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was really where, like, that's what they were trying to target, is these people who wanted this dark, gory, gruesome fantasy world, full of betrayal and political intrigue and things like that. And they delivered on that because Dragon Age Origins has all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so my thing is like, is their greed and their like love of money so, and like looking at their live service games, because I will not like provide, like, a lot of their mobile games and their like multiplayer games do generate a lot of money.
And like they have to make money to pay the salaries. I get it. Like money is not. I'm not saying they shouldn't make money. I feel I understand. Like we've got to make money. This is an industry for a reason. But the question is, where's the line between exploiting the developers to get as much money as you can versus earning a modest profit?
Right. And I just like, it's nonsensical. And I wonder how much like from EA's side is like a shareholder thing of like, our stock is plummeting. Not because, and like, this is my thing, it's not because of the games you're releasing. I mean, it is, but it's because of the quality and the marketing and business tactics you employ in your games.
And also, like we said on the Mass Effect Lorecast, EA has lost several studios this fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a major factor too. We can't blame everything on the underperformance of the Veilguard.
Right. I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of blame, but like, pitting these two like beloved studio franchises against each other just seems like
you're hurting both, like you said earlier.
And you're hurting yourself. And I don't understand, and I don't understand like there is so much fantasy interest in this like in this game. I mean, even just like fantasy things of like Expedition 33, like, which is not like true like high fantasy, but it is fantasy. There's magic and there's stuff like that. Like at what point is EA going to look up and look at the successes of Baldur's Gate, of Elden Ring, of Expedition 33, of all of these games and say, oh, there is a market for these single player games?
Well, I think, to be fair, that's why Dragon Age got to be a single player game. I mean, really, like, why I think the success of Baldur's Gate and even Elden Ring, like some of these successes are the reason why they got to pivot back to the single player game.
Yeah, I just don't know why they won't pivot away from their tried and trusted formula.
We could probably discuss that for hours, but the last kind of takeaway I want to talk about is about the tonal inconsistencies. And I do feel like one of the biggest issues of the writing of this game is the tonal inconsistency between the quests, the main quests, and like the banter, ambient dialogue, that kind of stuff. Like the tone of the quests is like more dark, what you would expect out of Dragon Age. and then some codex entries, the banter between companions, stuff at the lighthouse, it's very like lighthearted and goofy and funny. And so it's like, well, you go off to do a quest and like Treviso is completely blighted, and you come back and they're like joking about going camping. And it's just this complete like 180, like what the hell just happened? But I feel like after reading this article and, you know, reading about the development time, the not being able to rewrite everything, the Mass Effect team coming in and making changes, like all of that makes those inconsistencies make so much more sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And even just a point of like how I like that they added the feature where like if your dialogue gets interrupted, it'll start back over.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I felt like it caused a lot of like, I actually missed out on some dialogue because I never got there because I just kept
hearing the same thing over and over again.
Yes.
Yeah, it definitely needed to be tweaked a little bit. But I wanted to give you the chance if you had any other takeaways from the article in addition.
My takeaway is that I hate EA.
Yes. I didn't need the article to know that I hated EA.
But like I do. And it's honestly really, really sad to me because BioWare has produced several of my all-time favorite games all the way back to 2003 with KOTOR.
Yeah.
Like all-time favorite games. And like let's talk about EA for a minute, that not only did BioWare lose Baldur's Gate, which was a big marketing franchise or whatever, but EA lost Star Wars exclusivity. Do you know how much money that would have been? Do you know how much money they lost out when
it's significant.
when Lucasfilm's games terminated that contract?
Yeah. So that's why their stock is down.
Mm-hmm.
Not because Veilguard was a quote-unquote flop.
But because they lost one of the biggest franchises in the history
of
the world.
They lost FIFA, too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my God. You can't blame that on a smaller fantasy game.
No.
But, okay, so I do have a couple questions. 2 questions that I want to dig into. The first one is... And I think we're both going to have the same answer for this. But do you think that the gaming industry, still has room for big budget, single player RPGs, or do indie RPGs and new studios fill that void better now?
My answer is going to be complicated because, yes, I do think that there is room in the industry for these big budget games and all of these games to come in. The problem is that the indie studios are doing it better.
Yep.
The indie studios are doing it phenomenally better than the AAA studios. Like, not even in the same class of like ability of the game. The only like what I would consider a AAA studio who is making single player games at the same caliber is From Software.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very, very niche audience. I know a lot of people play those games, but like you have to like really want to play those games to do
I don't want to play those games.
And that's the only one that I feel like is releasing games of the same caliber as Baldur's Gate or Expedition 33 or a lot of other indie studios that are doing that. And like there is a lot of like old school RPGs, new games that are being released on Steam by indie studios that are not like they're not $70 games, like they're $20 games, $30 games, but they're getting a lot of traction on there and they're selling how they need to. And it's gonna be a different world, especially with the contract between Microsoft and Valve, which Valve owns Steam. That's going to create a whole different... The gaming industry is about to get shook up real good. And I think it's going to end up being a good thing, like these partnerships, all in all. But like it comes to the point of if these AAA studios want to release big budget single player games, they have to make them as good, if not better, than the indie studios, because it's at the point of like, yeah, I could go to this chain big restaurant to get this, you know, food item that's unique to whatever city I'm in, or I could probably find a hole in the wall restaurant that might not be as advertising, but odds are it's going to be better.
Like, why would I go to Applebee's when a local restaurant is just as good?
Right. Like,
and cheaper.
And you're gonna, like, it's a point of...
I know. I agree. I do. And I mean, I feel like there are so many AA studios, like I'm thinking of Larian specifically, that have just, you know, blown some of these other games out of the water. And I feel like, I think we all know that the margin of profit in the video game industry, if you're not dealing with a game that just went gangbusters on the charts, it's not as large as you think it would be. The profit margins are more slim than you would think, because you have to pay so much salary for the people who make the game. And when you do have this AAA studio, you have larger studios, and you have more people making the game, so you have higher costs to make it. So like on some level, I'm like, yeah, I get that, but that's not an excuse for the meddling. That's not an excuse for EA thinking that they know better than the developers.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I'm like, if you can cut that shit out and just let BioWare make a great game again, then yeah, I think that there is room for AAA big budget RPGs. But I don't see that ever happening.
Right. And I will just issue a warning, like, we can tell when story is written by AI.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
we can tell.
And to be clear, I don't think that was done in the Veilguard.
I don't either. But I know that's a trend, and it's a cost effective, and I can see AAA studios trying to pass that off.
I could definitely see EA pushing that.
Yeah.
But it's obvious when you use ChatGPT to write.
Go look at the forums of the Skyrim modding community to see how the fandoms react to AI writing.
Yeah, they don't like it.
They do not.
Okay, so I don't want to get us on a tangent with AI, because we could probably go on forever with that one. But my last question is, how much blame lies with EA versus BioWare? And, you know, can they really come back from this debacle?
I think I'm going to go 80-20. 80 on EA, 20 on BioWare. Because at the end of the day, like, I think a lot of this, like, yes, EA is crappy and it's majority blame on there, but the executives of BioWare could have pushed back. The executives of BioWare could have fought for their people, and maybe they did. Maybe they did, and EA just pushed in that, and maybe it would be closer to like 95-5 in that case. But I do think the majority of the blame lies with EA and unreasonable expectations of a live service game.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know what this means for the next Mass Effect game. I don't think we'll ever get another Dragon Age game.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think that was the end of the Dragon Age games. I think we might get some content. Some of these writers getting, you know, contracts to finish writing their stories and things like that. But I don't think there will be another Dragon Age game. And honestly, I don't think it'll be BioWare that comes out with the next EA single player game. I think if it is, it's going to be, depending on how David Gator's studio goes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that his studio could come up with some stuff.
But his studio isn't owned by EA.
No, but like, if it, like, that could be the next, like the resurrection of BioWare outside of EA.
Okay. Yeah.
But it also comes to the point of, like, I think EA is either going to acquire another AA studio,
mm-hmm.
or they're going to basically take the BioWare, close BioWare, and
repackage it in something
repackage
else.
BioWare or something else.
Yeah, I don't know. I think everything depends and hinges on how the next Mass Effect does and how the Mass Effect TV show goes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. We'll see with that. But I agree with you. I do place a high majority of the blame with EA, because I feel like the game that we would have gotten if they hadn't meddled at all would have been so much better. And like, yes, I understand that the instinct to meddle came from the Anthem debacle, which I feel like, yes, Anthem was a bad situation. But like, BioWare is under different leadership now. BioWare has kind of fixed some of those issues, and the fact that EA still like doesn't trust them, to me, is like, okay, why are we here? You know? So I feel like most of the blame lies on EA, and just kind of my takeaway and the last thing I want to say in this episode is like, the Veilguard, while it didn't live up to all of my expectations, at the end of the day, it was fine. Like, it wasn't a flop. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever played. It was a pretty good launch, and I left satisfied with the story. Yes, there were things I could have changed or wanted done differently, but like, it wasn't a bad game. It just didn't live up to our expectations.
I agree. And I think that where I'm at with this, and like, can BioWare like repair its relationship with the fans or anything like that, like, the thing that makes me the most mad is not the live service thing, is not the underperformance of the Veilguard or anything like that. It is EA and BioWare's treatment of their writers and their developers.
100%.
I mean, Trick Weeks came on the socials on Blue Sky and basically said, I do not want to talk about my time with the Veilguard development because it's
so traumatic.
It's so traumatic for them. And so like, that makes me mad. That makes me furious. That makes me want to never buy an EA or BioWare game ever again.
Right.
In some level.
I agree. And like, that kind of stuff is like, it's also, I feel for them, because like, these are developers who have been at this company for 2+ decades. Like, these are not peons that just got hired for the last 6 months of this dev cycle. Like, these are storied, historic employees of BioWare that should be treated with that respect. This is a writer who wrote Soulless, one of BioWare's best characters, most well-written characters of all time. I mean, he's not controversial because the writing's bad. He's so controversial because the writing's so good.
Exactly.
And EA just shits all over that. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating. And I think another thing is like, a lot of people, when the Veilguard first came out and, people were reviewing it and reacting to it, like, a lot of people shit on Corinne Bush because they were like, oh, well, she's the one that ruined this. She's the one that, made all these decisions about, the trans characters and the corny dialogue and all this kind of stuff that was unfounded completely in reality. And I just feel like I just want to shake some people, because to me, it was very clear that like, she came in and was trying to get this, she was sent in to get this game off the ground. Right. And I feel like this article completely confirms that. And she did a phenomenal job. The fact that this game came out in the quality that it did is nothing short of a miracle.
Yes. I definitely agree with that. And like, I feel sad in the thing of like, we're never getting a Dragon Age game, because like, I love Dragon Age and I'd love to explore more in the world and do that. It would be an entirely different thing if Dragon Age Inquisition had been the last Dragon Age game.
Yeah.
And like, I want to say that like, there is such a sense of finality. There's such a sense of like the world being wrapped up, almost in a sense of like there have been several times where some of my favorite games have wrapped up nicely, and then they brought it back a couple, some years later, and I was like, you've lost your identity a little bit.
Yeah.
Mass Effect, Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
Like, these are these things that happened there, and I will be perfectly content with the story of Dragon Age if the ending is the ending of the Veilguard.
All right.
And a sense of like, because I don't really need a follow-up to like the Executors or anything like that. But like, the fact that they reseed the veil and there's like the blights are over, and it's a point of like
Thetis can rebuild.
Yes, and they can
I would
be
love
who they
some more
want to be.
books.
Yes,
but yeah. Well, I think we're over an hour, so let's just wrap this up for the evening.
All right. Well, thanks for putting this together. And thanks for sticking with us in this article. Thank you so much for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DALorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipe Man Studios. Thank you, Pipe Man. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Are you a fan of Indiana Jones? How about someone who just enjoys an immersive story of historical fiction? If so, then the Indiana Jones Lorecast is the place for you. Join me, Sir Bandit, as we delve into the amazing and rich history of the Indiana Jones franchise, from the films and TV series to the novels, comics, and games. The show is available wherever you get your podcasts, so if you feel that call to adventure, you can come find me in my office. I'll see you there.